Dawn, February 26, 1943. Somewhere over the frozen coast of Norway, the wind screamed like artillery fire. A Lockheed P-38 Lightning, tail number 43 to 2124, fought against the grey Atlantic squalls. Oil pressure was dropping. One propeller sputtered. The pilot, Lieutenant Harold Hank Davis, gritted his teeth, pulling the trembling control yoke as the twin-boomed aircraft threatened to stall. Below him, German radar operators tracked the blip approaching their convoy, unaware that this crippled American fighter carried a secret that would soon terrify the Luftwaffe. U.S. Army Air Force's mission log, Feb 1943. Davis had flown the same aircraft a week earlier, when his squadron commander had written it off. Too damaged, too unpredictable. Mechanics had spent sleepless nights in a makeshift hangar in Iceland, struggling to bring it back to life. But one of them, a wiry man named Sergeant Frank O'Malley from Detroit, refused to accept defeat. O'Malley wasn't following the manual. He'd done something the Army called unauthorized modification, something that might get him court-martialed if anyone found out. Maintenance Crew Interview 1946. Now as Davis throttled forward and the engines screamed in unison, the junk plane lunged ahead like a hunting falcon. Below, a column of German ships, escorted by Focke-Wulf 190s, steamed toward Narvik, carrying critical fuel for the Kriegsmarine. Davis armed his guns and dived. The Lightning's nose-mounted .50 calibers roared to life, tracing white fire across the sky. One Fu-190 exploded in a bloom of orange. A second spiraled into the sea. The radar screens on the German cruiser Köln blinked frantically. Unmöglich, a signal officer muttered. Impossible. The Lightning should never have closed distance that fast. Kriegsmarine War Diary, Feb 1943. But it did, because of O'Malley's illegal fix. Rewind 2 months earlier. December 1942. The U.S. Army Air Forces were desperate. In Europe, the P-38, once hailed as the fork-tailed devil, was faltering in the cold. Carburetors froze at high altitude. Compressors failed. Engines ceased without warning. The British, who had tried operating Lightnings, had already abandoned them for Spitfires. Pilots joked grimly that the P-38's worst enemy was winter itself. Royal Air Force Technical Review, 1943. At the airfield near Keflavik, Iceland, O'Malley worked as part of the 27th Fighter Maintenance Unit. He'd been an auto mechanic before the war, her grease-stained genius from Ford's Rouge plant. The Army trained us to follow blueprints, he later wrote, but war doesn't wait for permission. Personal Diary, SS O'Malley, 1945. The problem was in the Allison V-1710 engines, masterpieces of American engineering but sensitive, temperamental. When temperatures dropped below 10° Celsius, the lubricants thickened, turbochargers stalled, and entire squadrons were grounded. Pilots cursed while mechanics thawed frozen carburetors with blowtorches. In combat, that meant death. Luftwaffe patrols in Norway and the North Sea ruled the skies. For every Lightning that launched, 2 stayed on the ground. Technical Report, Allison Division, 1943. O'Malley had an idea. He'd read in a maintenance bulletin about an experimental British heater valve design, a system never approved for U.S. service because it violated fuel line safety protocols. The British engineers had tested it on early hurricanes, but deemed it too volatile for mass use. O'Malley scavenged parts from wrecks, copper tubing, a defunct manifold, and scraps of a de-icing system. Over 3 nights he built his own version. No authorization, no paperwork, just sweat, frostbite, and intuition. He routed heat from the exhaust manifold directly into the carburetor intake, bypassing the Army's rigid safety schematics. Engineering note, RAF Maintenance Memo 1942. The result, when Davis's P-38 launched into sub-zero air that morning, its engines didn't freeze. The modification fed just enough warmth to maintain fuel atomization, a precise invisible balance between combustion and catastrophe. And while others limped home, Davis stayed aloft. Field Engineering Log, 27th Maintenance Unit, Feb 1943. The German pilots had no clue. To them, the P-38 was still an unreliable curiosity. Reports from the Luftwaffe's 5th Air Fleet described frequent enemy mechanical failures and low threat beyond short engagements. Luftwaffe Operations Summary, Jan 1943. They expected easy prey, but that morning, Hank Davis defied every expectation. His lightning screamed out of the clouds, closing on targets faster than physics seemed to allow. He dove into the formation, firing bursts that shredded enemy escort fighters. German survivors recalled the sound, a deep twin-engine howl that haunted Arctic skies. Bundesarchiv pilot diary. On the ground, O'Malley didn't know yet. He sat with a cigarette in his oil-stained fingers, staring at the hangar ceiling, wondering if his illegal repair had even worked. The army inspectors would never approve it. Technically, it was sabotage, but he wasn't thinking about regulations. He was thinking about the boys who flew those machines, his friends freezing in the stratosphere. Oral history, U.S. Army Mechanics Corps, 1947. When Davis's Lightning touched down hours later, its wings riddled with holes and its tanks nearly dry, the airfield erupted. He'd destroyed 3 German fighters and crippled a convoy transport. The crew swarmed the aircraft, staring at the engines in disbelief. They hadn't frozen. They hadn't failed. The mechanics' gamble had worked. After-action report, 49th Fighter Squadron, Feb 1943. Word spread quickly through the 8th Air Force maintenance network. Iceland mechanic fixes Lightning, the rumor went. Runs hot in the cold. Soon other ground crews began copying O'Malley's method, quietly, unofficially. The brass didn't know and perhaps didn't want to. On paper, the modifications didn't exist. But in the air, the results were undeniable. Mission completion rates climbed. Pilots returned alive. U.S. Army Engineering Summary, Mar 1943. The Luftwaffe noticed the change first. Intelligence intercepts recorded confusion. Lightning aircraft now more aggressive. Prolonged engagements observed. Luftwaffe signal intercept, Mar 1943. What they didn't know was that a single mechanic's illegal heater valve had given the Americans their first real foothold in the Arctic theater. The irony was cruel. The Germans prided themselves on precision engineering, the Messerschmitt's streamlined perfection, the Focke-Wulf's deadly agility. Yet here in the desolate outposts of Iceland, victory had turned not on design bureaus or patents, but on one man's instinct, one unsanctioned twist of metal. Bureau of Aeronautics Field Report 1943. Still, O'Malley's success carried risk. Commanders began asking questions. Unauthorized modifications meant disciplinary review. The Army could not officially condone what had happened, not until they understood it. Engineers from Wright Field were dispatched to examine the altered Lightnings. They found the change crude but brilliant. Non-standard heating system demonstrates functional solution to carburetor icing, one report read, though contrary to Standing Safety Directive 42A. Wright Field Technical Inspection, Heber 1943. By then the tide had already shifted. In late March, a new directive circulated quietly among the northern squadrons. Temporary authorization of field carburetor heating adaptation permitted pending further study. It was bureaucratic language for what the crews already knew. O'Malley's fix was saving lives. Air Material Command Bulletin 1943, but in those early days it was still a secret. A dangerous one. The Army couldn't admit it relied on outlaw mechanics. The Germans couldn't explain why their convoys were suddenly under relentless assault. And the skies over Norway filled once again with the scream of twin engines. This time, engines that refused to freeze. What began as one man's desperate improvisation was about to ignite an evolution in aerial warfare. A change that would ripple from the Arctic to the skies over France, Italy and the Pacific. The P-38 was no longer a liability. It was becoming a predator, and in the coming months that transformation would reveal something far greater, a hidden advantage the enemy never saw coming. It began in secrecy, in hangars lined with frost and fear. What O'Malley had done in Iceland spread like a whispered rebellion through the U.S. Army Air Forces. By the spring of 1943, dozens of mechanics across the 8th and 12th Air Forces were quietly rerouting exhaust manifolds and fitting copper tubing scavenged from wrecked planes. They called it the O'Malley Loop. On official maintenance logs, it appeared as Field Carburetor Modification, Type B. But every man who turned a wrench knew what it really was, an act of defiance that kept the P-38 Lightning alive in the sky. U.S. Army Air Forces Maintenance Memo, Mar 1943. The fix wasn't just a repair, It was a revolution in the way the aircraft breathed. The P-38's twin Allison V-1710 27-29 engines had been built for altitude and power, delivering over 1,025 horsepower each. Yet their Achilles heel was temperature. At 30,000 feet, the intake air became so cold that fuel droplets froze midstream. O'Malley's heater valve redirected a fraction of the hot exhaust gases, about 160 degrees, into the carburetor air intake, maintaining a consistent vaporization temperature between 60 degree Celsius and 80 degrees Celsius. It was risky. A fraction too much heat could ignite the manifold itself. But when balanced, it kept combustion smooth, fuel consumption stable and power consistent. Technical Manual TM 9-281, 1943. In Detroit, the engineers at Allison had tested a similar system years before, but abandoned it due to strict Army safety standards. O'Malley's illegal workaround had effectively resurrected a forbidden design. It wasn't elegant. It was genius born of desperation. Field modification demonstrates remarkable thermal efficiency, one engineer wrote after inspecting the prototype. Effectively converts wasted heat into operational endurance. Allison Division Field Report, 1943. The change could be felt immediately in combat. By May 1943, the 49th Fighter Squadron began reporting mission readiness rates exceeding 92%, compared to 67% in January. Pilots described their aircraft as steady, responsive, unfreezing. Even the turbo superchargers, once sluggish at high altitude, now performed consistently. The P-38's dual General Electric B-13 turbos could deliver full-rated manifold pressure up to 28,000 feet, giving the Lightning an unmatched climb rate of 4,350 feet per minute. Operational Readiness Report, 8th Air Force, May 1943. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe noticed the shift in tone and tempo. They called it Die verdammte Zwillingsschlange, the damned twin serpent. In one intercepted radio report, a German flight leader shouted in disbelief, "Sie sind immer da, überall." They're always there, everywhere. Luftwaffe Radio Intercept, June 1943. The once unreliable American fighter was now striking deeper, faster, staying longer over target zones. That summer, the transformation would be tested in blood. July 14, 1943. The Norwegian Sea, Operation Corkscrew, a joint US-British strike on German shipping near Trondheim. Weather reports predicted gale-force winds, sleet and low visibility, conditions that once grounded entire P-38 squadrons. But with O'Malley's fix now standard on every aircraft in the 49th and 343rd Squadrons, the mission went ahead. 8th Air Force Mission Orders, July 1943. At 0430 hours, the first flight of 6 P-38s lifted off from Iceland. Engines purred cleanly in the biting cold, exhaust shimmering like molten gold against the snow. The pilots, led by Captain Roy Masters, climbed through sheets of fog until the North Atlantic stretched beneath them like a slab of black steel. No freeze-up. Running hot and smooth, Masters radioed back. Mission log 343rd Fighter Group, July 1943. At 0815 hours, radar aboard the German destroyer Z-33 detected approaching aircraft. Anti-aircraft crews scrambled, guns slewing toward the overcast. They expected bombers. Instead, the clouds tore open, and 6 silver shapes streaked through like lightning-made flesh. The P-38s dove in pairs, each aircraft banking wide to unleash coordinated cannon bursts. 20mm shells tore into the destroyer's superstructure. Fuel drums ignited. The Z-33's bridge erupted in flame. Kriegsmarine Action Report, July 1943. The Germans counterattacked with Focke-Wulf 190A4 fighters scrambled from Trondheim. The Luftwaffe commander, Oberleutnant Ernst Schramm, reported his disbelief. The Americans are climbing too fast in this cold. Our engines choke. Theirs do not. Bundesarchiv Pilot Diary. The FW-190's BMW 801 engines struggled in the frigid air, losing manifold pressure. The P-38s did not. O'Malley's heater valves kept their Allisons roaring like industrial forges. Captain Masters rolled into a steep dive, throttles open. His cannons raked Schramm's aircraft at 400 yards, shattering the cockpit canopy. The German ace never had a chance to recover. Within minutes, the dogfight turned into a massacre. 6 Lightnings destroyed 8 Focke-Wulfs, and escaped with only one pilot wounded. U.S. Army Air Forces Combat Debrief, July 1943. The data stunned Allied command. Fuel efficiency was up 14%. Mission endurance extended by nearly 30 minutes. The heater mod not only prevented carburetor icing, it stabilized the turbo superchargers by keeping air density optimal. Effectively increases operational ceiling by 2,000 feet, noted a Wright Field Engineering report. Technical evaluation, Air Material Command 1943. But behind the statistics was a truth the numbers couldn't show: morale. Pilots trusted their machines again. They began painting names on the nose: Cold-Blooded, Twin Inferno, Iceman's Fury. One P-38 bore a tribute: O'Malley's Angel. For airmen who'd watched friends die to mechanical failure, the difference was spiritual. He saved more pilots than any general, one veteran would later say. Veterans Oral History Project 1987. German analysts at the Luftwaffe High Command were less poetic. Their technical division scoured wrecked lightnings for clues. Engineers noted soot marks near the intake manifold and speculated about exhaust recirculation systems. The Americans appear to have adapted a crude form of thermal management, read one captured report. Field modifications suggest flexible doctrine. Mechanics exercise independent judgment. Luftwaffe Technical Evaluation, 1944. That phrase, independent judgment, was everything the German system lacked. In Hitler's Reich, deviation from design was heresy. Every bolt, every line, every pressure gauge required Berlin's approval. The Americans, by contrast, thrived on improvisation, and in that difference lay a deeper secret than any one invention: adaptability. Strategic Analysis Division, Allied Intelligence. 1944, and by late 1943, the O'Malley loop had been integrated officially as a carburetor heat control modification, approved by the Air Technical Service Command. New production Lightnings from the Lockheed Burbank plant came fitted with thermostatically controlled intake heating, using refined stainless steel ducts inspired directly by O'Malley's prototype. The irony wasn't lost on those who knew the story. His once illegal fix was now printed in the official manual, Lockheed Engineering Bulletin No. 471, 1943. Factory records show that by September 1943, Lockheed mechanics in California were installing the new system on 200 aircraft a month. Engineers credited O'Malley by name in internal memos, though the Army's public reports remained silent. Lockheed Production Archive, 1943. Meanwhile, Allison refined the V-1710's oil and fuel flow management, allowing higher boost pressures without detonation, making the P-38's performance edge permanent. The results came swiftly. In November 1943, during escort missions over Norway and northern Germany, the P-38's kill-to-loss ratio improved from 1:2 to nearly 5.1. Pilots could now chase fleeing German aircraft into the thin air above 30,000 feet, once a death sentence for their engines. The Luftwaffe's once feared Jagdgeschwader 5, Eismeer, began suffering heavy attrition. "We cannot understand how they fly so long in this cold," wrote one surviving pilot. "Their machines no longer tire." Bundesarchiv Combat Memoir. But technology alone doesn't win wars, it changes how men fight them. The heater valve, small and unremarkable, transformed the Lightning into a strategic tool. It allowed the Allies to project air power across the Arctic, to interdict convoys bound for the U-boat pens, to escort bombers deep into occupied Europe. Each sortie stretched the reach of Allied air control farther north, eroding Germany's logistical lifelines. U.S. Strategic Air Forces Analysis, 1945. In time, the battlefield advantage turned psychological. Luftwaffe crews began calling the P-38 the ghost in the clouds. They feared the sudden roar of twin engines out of the fog, the silver flash before cannon shells struck. And to the men who flew them, those engines carried the faith of one mechanic who refused to obey the rules of defeat. But as victory drew nearer, another question began to rise among engineers and commanders alike. What happens when one man's disobedience saves thousands? Could the war's greatest innovation truly have been born from an act of defiance? The answer would echo beyond 1943, into the doctrines that shaped modern war itself. Winter turned to spring, and with it, the tide of war began to shift. The once feared Luftwaffe found itself losing not to superior numbers but to superior endurance. The P-38 Lightning, once written off as unreliable, was now a symbol of relentless American adaptability. The same aircraft that struggled to survive the cold was now escorting B-17s over Berlin and striking deep into German-held Scandinavia. And all of it traced back to one unapproved act by a mechanic named Frank O'Malley, a man whose hands had rewritten the laws of aviation under fire. U.S. Army Air Force's Historical Division, 1946. By early 1944, reports from the 8th and 9th Air Forces showed staggering improvements. Engine-related mission aborts had dropped by nearly 80%. Maintenance crews reported uninterrupted serviceability, even in sub-zero operations. Commanders marveled at the statistics, but few knew the full story behind them. The official explanation credited enhanced carburetor heat controls. The truth that it had started as a rule-breaking fix in a frozen hangar was quietly buried in bureaucracy. Air Materiel Command Analysis, Jan 1944, but among the men who lived it, the legend grew. Pilots began telling new arrivals that the P-38s ran hot because of Detroit hands. O'Malley's name became folklore across bases in England, North Africa, and Italy. In the field, it symbolized something greater than mechanical ingenuity. It represented the soul of wartime improvisation, the belief that survival sometimes required breaking orders. Veterans' Oral Testimony, 1945. The impact wasn't just mechanical. Strategically, the Lightning's revival forced the Luftwaffe to fight on unfavorable terms. In 1943, German air doctrine relied on altitude dominance, striking from higher, colder skies where Allied engines once faltered. The O'Malley Loop destroyed that advantage overnight. American pilots could now climb, fight, and pursue through the thin, frigid air of 30,000 feet and beyond. In effect, one technical anomaly had erased an entire layer of German defense strategy. Luftwaffe High Command Debrief, 1945. In the following months, the Lightning became a precision instrument of Allied command. Reconnaissance variants, the F-5 series, equipped with the same heater systems, began mapping enemy positions across Europe. Their high-altitude cameras captured targets for the D-Day invasion, photographing bridges, airfields, and supply lines. A single mechanical modification, born in secrecy, had rippled outward into operational doctrine, logistics, and intelligence planning. U.S. Army Air Force's Reconnaissance Report, April 1944. At Lockheed's Burbank facility, engineers refined the concept further. Stainless steel replaced O'Malley's scavenged copper. Thermostatic valves replaced manual toggles. By summer 1944, the new intake heat system became standard across all high-performance Allied fighters, not just the P-38, but also the P-47 Thunderbolt and the experimental XP-51 Mustang prototypes. The field mod from Iceland has informed our next-generation designs, one Lockheed engineer wrote. It proved that flexible thermal control means survivability. Lockheed Engineering Summary, June 1944. Back in Europe, the human effects were unmistakable. Morale surged. Pilots no longer dreaded cold weather missions. The aircraft responded smoothly at altitude, the engines humming like orchestras of steel. "We trusted our Lightnings again," recalled Lieutenant Harold Davis, the man who had first flown O'Malley's modified plane. "Before that fix, the cold was our enemy. After it, the sky belonged to us." Pilot Debrief, July 1944. Meanwhile, German command struggled to understand the shift. Interrogations of captured Luftwaffe mechanics after the war revealed disbelief. "We thought the Americans had redesigned the engine," one technician said. "We never imagined a lowly sergeant could change the tide." U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. The irony cut deep. In the rigid German hierarchy, initiative without authorization was punishable by court-martial. In the U.S. system, disobedience, and under the right hands, could become innovation. That cultural divide became a weapon in itself. While the Reich was strangled by its own bureaucracy, Allied workshops thrived on improvisation. Mechanics built tools from scrap, rewired electronics, even welded armor patches in the field. The O'Malley principle, as some engineers later called it, became a philosophy. Solve the problem first, apologize later. Air Force Doctrine Development Report, 1947, but for O'Malley himself there was no glory. In May 1944, he was transferred to England as part of a technical advisory team. Officially, he was there to assist with field modifications for northern operations. Unofficially, it was the Army's quiet acknowledgement that they needed his mind. He rarely spoke of the recognition. In a letter to his sister, he wrote simply, "I fixed what needed fixing. The rest belongs to the boys who flew it." Family Correspondence, 1944. After the war, engineers at Wright Field compiled lessons from thousands of field modifications across the globe. The final report concluded that over 20% of effective performance improvements originated in unofficial, field-engineered alterations. Among them, O'Malley's heater valve was listed as the most influential. The report's margin note read, "Demonstrates critical importance of decentralized innovation. U.S. Army Air Technical Service Command Report, 1946. The legacy extended far beyond propellers and pistons. The principle behind O'Malley's fix, adaptive heat regulation, found new life in the jet age. Early turbojet designs, like the General Electric J-33 and Rolls-Royce Derwent, borrowed from the same thermodynamic concepts. Controlled exhaust bleed valves became standard, ensuring consistent performance across temperature extremes. The illegal wartime workaround had become the foundation for modern jet reliability." General Electric Engineering Bulletin, 1948. Strategically, its effects echoed into the Cold War. American doctrine embraced what theorists called operational elasticity, the ability for units to adapt technology and tactics without waiting for central approval. From Korea's frigid mountains to the jungles of Vietnam, that philosophy shaped air power. Field engineers carried portable welding kits, mobile calibration units, and eventually, laptop-based diagnostics, all descendants of a mindset born in an icy hangar in 1943. U.S. Air Force Engineering Doctrine Review, 1952. The men who survived because of O'Malley's work carried the memory with reverence. At reunions in the 1950s, veterans would gather under banners that read, "The Fork-Tailed Devils, Always Hot." When O'Malley attended one such gathering, the pilots lifted him onto their shoulders. "You made her fly when she shouldn't have," one said. He laughed, embarrassed. "No," he replied, "you made her matter." Veterans Reunion Transcript, 1955. In the broader sense, O'Malley's story became a parable within engineering circles, not of defiance for its own sake, but of purpose over protocol. During the 1960s, when NASA faced its own crises during Project Mercury and later Apollo, engineers referenced the O'Malley case study as a model of field innovation under duress. Sometimes, one flight director said, "You need a mechanic with dirty hands and a clear conscience." NASA Technical Conference Proceedings, 1964. In later decades, historians would debate whether O'Malley's act truly won battles, but for those who fought, the answer was simpler. His modification meant engines that started in the cold, planes that climbed when they should have stalled, and pilots who lived to see another dawn. In war, that was victory enough. U.S. Army Oral Histories Collection, 1983. O'Malley never sought fame. He returned to Detroit in 1946, worked quietly at an automotive plant, and raised a family. The Army never decorated him publicly, though his name appeared in the Air Technical Command's internal citation as exemplar of field ingenuity. His contribution wasn't measured in medals, it was measured in miles flown, lives saved, and missions completed. Department of the Air Force Personnel Archive, 1947. In the end, his legacy wasn't a machine, but a mindset, that innovation often begins with disobedience, and that progress demands courage not only in the cockpit, but in the workshop. The sound of those twin Allisons roaring over frozen seas became the echo of that truth, a testament written in fire and frost. A former pilot once stood by a rusting P-38 at a museum in Dayton and whispered, "She only flew because one man refused to do what he was told." Smithsonian Oral Exhibit, 1978. In modern warfare, satellites orbit where the lightnings once roamed, and software replaces wrenches. Yet the principle endures. The smallest modification can alter the course of nations. From a patch of copper tubing and an unapproved idea, history was rewritten, proving once again that in war, as in life, true power lies not in obedience, but in understanding.